We're on to our panel discussion. Emmett, Cunningham, and myself will moderate. I think, Emmett, you're going to open with a question.
We have a series of questions. We've heard several companies have used this technique. We now recognize it as a relatively new technique compared to intravitreal injections, which I remember being introduced maybe 25 years ago in mass use. Mark, maybe you could talk to us about, of all the things you've heard this afternoon, which of them do you find the most compelling uses for suprachoroidal? Where do you see this going over time?
Great question, tough question. So you've heard a selection of some really interesting uses. I think, for example, with Aura, when you saw that intravitreal injection didn't quite lead you to the efficacy, safety profile that you're looking for, looking with Regenexx Bio, same idea, you want to reduce inflammation, at least. So the idea being, how can we best maximize the efficacy? So, long story short, this is a great way of getting drug to the back of the eye. I don't think of this necessarily as this is one indication specific. I think it's more as are you treating a posterior segment issue, and is there a drug that perhaps has been shelved for other reasons because it wasn't working well intravitreally, and this could be retooled?
Great.
I can just add to that. I think the virus-like drug conjugate by Aura, the Belsar, is really interesting because, as we heard, there were studies looking at that intravitreally, and there was some inflammation. And then when they went suprachoroidally, there's basically almost no inflammation. And that's a great example of how ocular drug delivery can change the risk-benefit profile of a drug and really almost take a drug off the shelf and have it become potentially very useful, in the case of choroidal melanoma, potentially life-saving.
Yeah, maybe I can just add to it from my own personal perspective. I think when you're putting things into this space, if you're targeting the choroid or the very outer retina, the RPE, it makes the most sense. And it's also particularly useful for things that are not very soluble and where you're worried about what we call snow globing in the eye. So if you put it in this confined space and it's confined, you won't get snow globing. So that can be very attractive.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I guess next question, and a related subtopic to Bob. So we've heard about small molecule suspensions, gene therapy, virus-like drug conjugates being administered suprachoroidally. I know all of our crystal balls are cracked, but how do you anticipate these advancements will ultimately alter the landscape of retinal treatment over the next decade?
Yeah, as you said, the suprachoroidal route of administration is got a lot of different directions that are going on right now for both drugs and for viral vectors that will do gene therapy. Let's pick one of them. For the gene therapies, this is going to be maybe the most exciting thing that happens over the next 5 or 10 years in retina. And I really hope that the suprachoroidal route of, for example, for the Regenexx program, I really hope that it's an effective route. We're happy to do the subretinal surgery. We like that surgery, okay? But when you're talking to a patient with AMD or with diabetic retinopathy, a lot of them are going to say, no, I don't want to go to the operating room, doctor. I'll just stick with the injections every month or 2 months, okay? If you can tell them, hey, this will be an office procedure that I'll do for you that's, pretty much in the same category as the intravitreal injections that I'm doing now, and it's a one and done, a couple of things happen. There will be a much higher patient uptake with it, okay? And it lets me do much earlier intervention, okay? Take, for example, the Altitude study, all right, looking at diabetic retinopathy. It's hard to start someone on monthly intravitreal injections when their vision is good and all they've got is diabetic retinopathy. You're doing it as a preventative thing. But if you can do it as a in-office one and done, to put anti-VEGF into their eye from the suprachoroidal space, there will be a lot more uptake and a lot more eagerness for us to do this very early intervention, which is always the best time to intervene in medicine, earlier.
Yeah, and just to extend that line of thinking, so clearly, asymptomatic, non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy patient, as you said, won't want to have monthly or every other month injections, but they also won't want to have subretinal delivery of gene therapy, right? They won't want to go to the operating room. So if you could do an in-office one and done, or just an in-office procedure.
Dry AMD.
Yeah.
dry AMD to prevent onset of wet, okay? High-risk dry AMD, I could never give them subretinal therapy or intravitreal therapy, but I could give a one and done for a suprachoroidal space. So feel free to go ahead and start your clinical trial based on that idea.
So, Kirstie, you had sales at Bausch and Lomb, and you have this product now FDA approved with XIPHERE. Tell us about the launch and how you've helped the physicians get ready to use this injector primarily, which they may or may not have had, probably did not have experience with since it was limited to trial. So how have you helped them prepare, and what's the uptake been like, and what's your guidance? Where do people most typically go wrong when they try to use this?
Yeah, so suprachoroidal injection technique is very innovative, right? We heard from Raphael, and one of the first things that he stated in his presentation was how important it is, how critical it is for the training component, right, in helping doctors to educate them prior to and how to do this injection. I like to say it's not more difficult, it's not easier, it's just different, right? It's a different way that we're injecting. And so in collaboration with Clearside, when prior to launch and everything, we put a lot of time and effort into the training component and came up with a very nice training kit that does contain the injector as well as the 2 needles, and a model eye that very much mimics the human eye. It has 4 quadrants, and so all of this is a part that we do require that the doctors train on prior to injection. We have a team of retina account managers throughout the country that are ready, willing, and able to go in and work with the physicians and helping to be there and support those first few injections. Just a number of other things. When we first launched, and we still have this, is we have a virtual platform where you can request an expert physician in suprachoroidal injection to do a virtual training with you. We also have an expert opinion where you can request a one-on-one conference with a physician, again, an expert within suprachoroidal injection. We have a team of MSLs that are dedicated to going out. Obviously on our website, we have a live training video. And then at all of the different conferences, we're doing physician-led trainings as well as brochures and things like that. But I can say that the training component is critical to the success of suprachoroidal injection.
Great.
Next question, I think, will be for Mark. Mark, you've become a real expert in actually performing the procedure. I know you were in our Clearside trials. I think you're also a REGENXBIO investigator, is that right?
Correct.
So you've injected small molecule suspensions and gene therapy. How do you, when you think about suprachoroidal injection, how do you compare it with respect to ease, convenience, and patient comfort? Any thoughts on the various forms of injection with respect to IV, intravitreal versus suprachoroidal?
Sure. I mean, we've, as a field, become very comfortable with intravitreal injections. It's become second nature to us. We don't even think about it. So if you approach your first suprachoroidal injection in that manner, you're going to be in for a rough awakening. It is different. It is different, right? So, and that's why there was a white paper on that as well. In terms of, I think the biggest thing is patient preparation. There's going to be a little bit more pressure. It's going to be a little bit more involved. The positioning is more important. This is actually one of the few procedures that I typically use a speculum for because I want good control. That said, it is not something that is very difficult once you have a few under your belt. I mean, you're talking to, retina specialists, retina surgeons here. This is not something that's out of our wheelhouse. It's just something that there's a learning curve involved.
Yeah, I'll put a plug in for the paper you mentioned. So we published a paper on suprachoroidal injection guidelines. Emmett, myself, and Mark were authors on this. And I also want to point out that Emmett was also an author on the original intravitreal injection guideline paper. So it's great to still have you around, Emmett.
I have a story about that too. When we first started doing intravitreal injections a lifetime ago, I've had some very famous retina doctors say, you'll never be able to scale that. So now millions and millions are done every year. Mark, I apologize, I should know this, and it's completely understandable that you have a vast experience with the Clearside device. Have you actually used the other two devices, or no?
Not on a real patient, no.
So maybe I'll ask, and have you used the other devices, Bob? So many have not because they're limited to these trials. I'll ask an unfair question to the two surgeons on the panel. Do you have any impressions about which would be the easiest in your hands to use, which you would be, just from a use perspective, which you would prefer to use, if all else being equal, if they were available?
I mean, all else being equal, I'll take the device that's easiest to use, that requires the least amount of pressure, the least amount of positioning, and also is the most reliable, right? So right now, again, this is a theoretical, because I really haven't played with all the other injectors, but Clearside is the most validated. But competition is good, right? So if a new needle comes out and there's less resistance there, and it's a little bit easier to learn, that may be a good thing too.
Yeah.
This was the first time that I saw the silicone needle technology, and kind of fascinating. I'm assuming this is a MEMS production. And so, yeah, I've played with that a little bit in the past also, and they are super sharp, like super sharp. So, great as a needle for this application, but have you thought of giving me some options for just surgical blades, like corneal incision blades, single use, throw away? What about a super sharp intravitreal needle, okay, that goes into the eye like butter and doesn't, I'm getting off topic, sorry guys. But we surgeons like sharp, so I'm just intrigued by that technology.
Yeah, I would say, I think all the injectors are interesting. I too think the super sharp is very interesting, but I would add that most of these injectors are being used in clinical trials, and it's not just an injector, it's a collaboration. And so and you would be able to speak to this, Tom, that when you start to go, you take your drug or whatever, your virus, whatever you're going to deliver to that company, they don't just hand you their device, right? You're working very directly with them, and and they help with the training and everything. And so for those of you who are thinking about going suprachoroidal but have not, I would encourage you to speak to all the three providers or manufacturers that you've heard from today, and any others that are out there, and really look at their capabilities. And they'll probably have very different terms for working with them as well. And the competition is good, I think. You want to have competition in a space like this. So go ahead, Tom. I'm sorry.
Yeah, just highlight what you said, Emmett. I'm sure it's true for the other suprachoroidal injection companies. I know when I was at Clearside, we had a very supportive program with potential partners. You heard Raphael speak. He's been a biomedical engineer for many years. He's been at Clearside for 13 years. We used to send out a very experienced biomedical engineer to the animal facilities, and they would either proctor or do the injections on behalf of the partnering company. And then we sort of guided these companies from soup to nuts through not only just with their injections in various animal species, but also with respect to thinking about their protocol and some of the endpoints preclinically as well as clinically. I guess next question will be for Kirstie. So Kirstie, as Bausch and Lomb continues to support development in this space, you're clearly paving the way for widespread adoption of suprachoroidal therapy. I think that the training program, as you described, is a real benefit to this community. I do want to add that Model I that they supply in the training kit is very interesting. It has 4 different quadrants, as she started to mention. Each quadrant has a slightly different thickness. And so you can practice on this Model I and get the feel for resistance versus loss of resistance. But in any case, as Bausch and Lomb has made the considerable effort to really spur development in this space, what advice do you have for small biotechs with compounds of potential interest for suprachoroidal delivery with respect to partnerships? How do you see that? What do you look for in potential partners that may approach you to either partner, say, Zyper out for alternative indications, or maybe partner with you in Clearside jointly to develop other therapies in the space?
Yeah, we spend so much time with Clearside, right? And we truly do value that partnership. It's imperative, right, to the success of the product. And when that relationship is strong, it brings so much, right? It offers a number of things, a number of different resources, and an entire network to take something that is in its infancy and truly bring it to a viable treatment. And so I know from Bausch and Lomb's standpoint, we are committed to that. And so I do just encourage that these startups, the bio startups, and that you do partner with industry, right? Because it's the two both have so much to give one another, and we need each other, right? So I do encourage you to reach out and make sure to build those relationships with industry.
I have a question that I didn't discuss with the panel beforehand, but I want to ask it anyway. We discussed it on the panel that Tom and I had when he was still at Clearside about how to do these techniques, and that is that not every injection works. It's a very low number, but the scleral thickness can vary, and there's a 1 in X where you're unable to inject the patient. And so, Mark, maybe you could kick us off, or Mark or Tom, or if you have experience from the actual launch. But how often does it happen that you can't inject, and how are you counseling physicians to address that when it happens? You tell a patient, you walk them through the risks and the benefits, and then you get to do it, and you can't actually do it. How often does that occur, and how do you deal with it?
Sure. So I think from the trials, I want to say it was maybe 20 or 30% of the time you have to switch needles. Tom, correct me if I'm wrong.
That's about right. So the microinjector has 2 different needles, a short needle and a long needle, and the investigators are counseled to start with the short, and then if they don't feel loss of resistance, they are asked to switch to the longer needle.
Right. So I mean, that's data. I can tell you anecdotally, and you can take that for what it's worth. I've not had to switch needles. The 900 microneedle works for me. I think it's a question of being perpendicular, being willing to reposition, and frankly, being willing to apply the right amount of pressure to enter the appropriate space. So it has not happened to me where I felt like I could not deliver the dose. Now, has it happened to me where I wondered, well, was there some reflux or was I in the right space? And that's possible, but on average, it goes pretty smoothly. What do you think?
I mean, you can get reflux with an intravitreal injection too.
Oh yeah,
we
sure.
see that sometimes. So.
And what about commercially? What have people been saying?
So it's a guidance, right? We don't, if there's sometimes physicians, we do have a number of physicians that prefer to start with the 1100 versus the 900. I would say majority do start with the 900, and about 75% of the time the 900 works. And then if it doesn't, then they'll switch to the 1100. But outside of that, it really comes down to physician preference and how hard are they willing to dimple, right? And some just aren't as comfortable with having to dimple more. If you recall from Raphael's, you want to go perpendicular, you want to dimple, and then you want to go slow. Those are the 3 important things to remember. And so with that, again, in the clinical studies, about 75% were with the 900, and then the additional had to switch to the 1100. That's very similar to what we see.
The other thing I recall very distinctly from the very earliest injections now years ago, maybe more than a decade ago, were these descriptions of patient discomfort, that it would be slightly painful for the patients, as if when opening that potential space was uncomfortable. But I don't know whether it was the potential space or the dimpling or just the lack of familiarity. Any insights anyone has into, is it uncomfortable? Do you counsel about discomfort?
Yeah, I mean, it can be. Intravitreal injection can be uncomfortable too, depending on how you numb the patient. But I think of the two, between intravitreal and suprachoroidal, I think suprachoroidal might have a higher risk of having some patient discomfort. And some of that could be pressure sensation that the patient's just not ready for. Some of that could be the expansion of the space. Maybe I was injecting a little bit too fast. But it's very rare that a patient will say, oh, I don't want to do a suprachoroidal injection anymore.
I guess for Bob and Mark and Emmett, you've all been innovators in this space. Are there any innovations or new therapeutic classes you'd like to see developed or have potential practicality in this space? Again, we talked about small molecules, gene therapy, and virus-like drug conjugates. What about maybe cell therapy? Any thoughts on cell therapy in this space versus taking a patient to surgery and doing a vitrectomy? Emmett, you're always very thoughtful. Do you have any thoughts on
I'm trying to think
the potential
which cells I would want to put between the choroid and the sclera, and I can't think of many. What is interesting, I think both the Aura and I showed a humanized rabbit choroidal melanoma model. It's immunosuppressed rabbits, and the choroidal melanoma cells are actually injected with our injector, or at least they were when I was at Clearside, in the rabbit. And I think that showed the potential viability of injecting cells in that space. And so the question becomes, can you inject stem cells in the space for like a neurotrophic effect? Any thoughts on that? Well, what I was going to go to is cells. There's talk of using cells as biofactories. So you have these cells produce proteins, much more durable expression than a direct injection, perhaps less than a gene therapy, but another way to get durable expression of these cells. The issue with the suprachoroidal space is it's a fluid-filled space with a very high circulation, right? And so whatever you put there tends not to stay there forever, cells included. So I really haven't thought of the use of cells for that space.
I haven't really thought about cell therapy, but one thing that does come to mind in terms of what's unique to suprachoroidal injection is we've all gotten very comfortable talking about Retina and to some extent even RPE, but I think as we look into the choroid more and see what choroidal pathologies that we can treat, I think this is going to be uniquely positioned for that.
Any particular choroidal pathologies where you think this may be applicable?
Honestly, I'm just looking at the aging choroid. How many patients do we have that come in and say, oh, my light and dark adaptation is terrible? And you look in expecting to see macular degeneration, and you don't. And so I think it's pretty standard that we just chalk everything up to age because we don't know how to deal with it, how to diagnose it, how to treat it. And so we have this new approach to drug delivery, and the question is, can we find something that we can use that for?
Many years ago, Lon Harris and I published extensively on blood flow perturbations and age-related macular degeneration. Yeah. And so your point's well taken. Maybe you can inject something that secretes a neurotrophic factor and supports the choroid and maintains a robust choroidal circulation.
I also personally, I think the suprachoroidal approach is far superior to subretinal for many. Well, it seems to me like it should be superior. It just gets to the entire retina when one wants to get to the entire retina, and it seems like a much more accessible technique than subretinal delivery. The only reason I can think to go subretinally, and I'll ask you to comment perhaps, would be you can get a higher concentration, so maybe more effective transduction if you're trying to give a virus into that space. But I could easily see that suprachoroidal would be the route of choice for gene therapy, gene delivery, for example, over time. And for, as I said, relatively insoluble molecules that can't be formed into a pellet and then express first or zero order release kinetics.
Great.
Yeah. Any other thoughts?
I just love the viral drug conjugate to treat choroidal melanoma. A huge problem that we have. I don't treat those patients directly anymore, but lots of experience with it. And radiation works, but you get all the after effects of radiation and radiation retinopathy, radiation optic neuropathy, late recurrence. So it's just sort of genius to put the drug into the choroidal space where the choroidal tumor is, and then to be able to activate it with this photosystem. I think that one looks very promising for patients. And then again, it allows earlier intervention. Okay, so if I have a suspicious nevus or something that could be an early melanoma, there's less of a barrier to going ahead and starting to treat it with this type of system as opposed to putting a plaque on or something more invasive like that.
Great point.
Any other? We have a red light, but I have one last question because I was asked this question at the break. If I want to inject steroids into the suprachoroidal space, can I get your needle commercially, or is it not available commercially? The U needle commercially? A grant program. So it's so it has to be in a development program. It's not available commercially. Okay. Very good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Really appreciate your attention.
Yes.